But today we are focusing on making the most of the BioSciences career fair. And really the advice I'm showing you today is going to be helpful for any career fair that is going on. As I mentioned, I'm Joseph Barber. I'm the Director of Graduate Career Initiatives here at Penn's Career Services. In terms of nuts and bolts, the BioSciences is going to be at the end of September. So the things that I'm talking about in terms of prep work, you have time to be doing this, which is great because I know it's busy and other things are going on. So the pre-work is an important part of making the most out of the career fair, especially if you feel, a little bit overwhelmed by what a career fair is, or don't know for sure what you're going to get out of it or how it can be helpful to you. You can go ahead and register for these events on Handshake. So let's sort of break it down in sort of general terms, right? So for our in-person fair, what do you actually need to do in order to make the most out of this? You can register for this now on Handshake. You don't need to pre-register to attend the fair. You can literally just turn up with your Penn card or your top card or your Worcester card if you're one of our postdocs and attend. But you can register ahead of time, and that makes me feel good because I see people are interested in the fair. You can bring copies of a resume to hand out, but you're not really applying for jobs when you're chatting with employers at the tables. The resume is a sort of a shared context for who you are so that you can have a conversation about yourself. And I think that's an important part of distinguishing what these career fairs are. They're not interviews for jobs, especially the virtual fair where you have these one-on-one designated times. They're opportunities to gain knowledge. But the resume is a great sort of standardized document that sort of puts you into context for the employer. So you can certainly do that. If you are early in your program at Penn, you probably don't have a resume. And certainly as you come up to an employer, you can say to them, I don't have a resume to share, but let me tell you about myself, right? Because they don't want your non-tailored resume when you are, not actively applying. You're also going to need a verbal introduction for yourself, right? You cannot just give them the resume. Here I am. And then, wait for them to read it and then figure out who you are. You do have to sort of supplement that physical version with your own narration of who you are. You are a better version of your resume than your resume will ever be, right? So remember that because that's so important. So you need to just have given some thought to how you want to introduce yourself and what the main takeaways are about you to the person that you're chatting with. And that might be different depending on the different employers that you may engage with. From a networking perspective, the best way to network is to have questions, right? So you want then to have some questions prepared ahead of time that you can ask the employers to start the conversation off. It might be a short conversation, a couple of minutes. It might even be a long conversation because there may be lots of time and no one queued up behind you where you can really engage in a more in-depth conversation about some of the things you're interested in or want to know about that employer. But that's key to any successful networking is having questions. From the virtual side, you have to register on Handshake in order to participate. There is no turning up on the day and wandering around. It's all virtual and it's all pre-assigned and pre-scheduled appointments. So registration for the virtual doesn't open until a week before, so around the 22nd. Then, and I'll show you some screenshots of what it's going to look like for you. Then you can pick one-on-one appointments with the different employers that you're interested in, or 30-minute group sessions to learn more about them. In those sessions, you still have an opportunity, especially in the one-on-ones, obviously, to have a conversation with the employers. So you still want to have a narrative about who you are and to be able to introduce yourself, and you still want to have questions. You still can have a resume. You can share a link to it that you might have in a box file or a Google Drive, or you can upload a resume to your Handshake profile, and that can be shared as well. So again, some of the steps are slightly different, but ultimately, you introducing yourself and asking questions is fundamental to any career fair experience. And so building up around that is going to be important. As I said, we are doing both of these versions, right? We were only in-person pre-pandemic, and then we're only virtual during the pandemic, and now we have the option to do both because everyone is sort of comfortable. The walking into a room of any number of people, can be fairly overwhelming. Again, from my perspective as someone with introverted tendencies, it's not where I want to be. It's not where I choose to be. So that's something to manage. The virtual fairs are going to have most of this one-on-one interaction, which is also in its own way can be challenging. But if you know what's going to happen, you know who you're going to be chatting with, and you know for how long, that control aspect I think makes it a very engaging experience and can be engaging. So the in-person can be engaging too. You just have to know what your plan is and have a strategy to engage, and not necessarily wander around table to table hoping that that's going to give you information, but to come in knowing which tables you're going to engage with and knowing what you want to get from those interactions. That's fundamental, I think, to making the most of this. If you sort of turn up and you wander around, you might walk away with some freebies, but you aren't necessarily going to walk away with the information that you need or some good next step practices for what you're going to do to engage with those employers. Other things that you can be doing, especially in terms of the in-person career fair, but again, most of this applies to both fairs. When employers register for these career fairs on Handshake, they often have jobs that they're posting as well. So if you look at go to the employer, the list of employers that are registered for each of the career fair pages, and you click on the employer, you'll see what jobs that they have available. You can look at those jobs, and some of those will be jobs that they are actively wanting to talk to you about during the career fair. Some of those will just be other jobs that they have in their organization. But you can get a sense of obviously what they're interested in. And a lot of your questions for the employers might be based on what those jobs say or what those internships say. Hey, I saw that you have an internship on this. I'd love to learn more about that, right? I saw it's posted on Handshake. Can you tell me more about that? Or are you the right person to tell me more about this position? So that sort of background research into their jobs is great, because ultimately employers come to career fairs because they do want to recruit, sometimes specifically for a position, sometimes generally. They want to create a sort of a pipeline for students at Penn, postdocs at Penn to their organizations. So they may be there more broadly, or they may have a very, very specific thing that they want to talk about, right? And so you doing some research ahead of time is going to be helpful. When you're on Handshake, you can actually follow employers. It's like one of the buttons next to the employer's name. And that means that anytime that they post a job or an interview schedule or register for a fair, you'll get a notification through Handshake that the employer is doing something. So that's something that you should be doing for any organization that you're particularly interested in. Your research can extend obviously beyond Handshake, online research into the organization, people that you know in your own networks who might work at this organization or know about this organization. That can be some of your pre-work too, just to learn as much about the organization as possible so that you can generate some informed questions that you can ask the representatives. The representatives at these career fairs are either recruiting members of HR, talent acquisition, or they're alumni in the roles that sometimes that they're recruiting for. So a consulting firm might have a recruiter, but it also may have a consultant who was a Penn alum or a former Penn postdoc in that role, right? So you can see that there are different types of conversations that you might have with a recruiter versus someone who's an alum from Penn. The alums often have a banner that will be stuck to their name badge that says alum, so you can see them up front in the in-person event, harder to see in the virtual event. You know, the advice that we give on resumes is generally have a targeted resume for every job that you apply to. And that is good advice to have in a career fair if you're sort of walking around it and it's the foundation to your conversations. It's hard to have a super targeted resume because there are many different organizations out there. But this is where your own narrative comes into play. You can say, this is a general version of my resume, but let me tell you about some of my specific experiences that I think are going to be relevant to you as an organization, right? And then you can bring those to life in your own narrative. And that's going to be so effective because employers, they want to have conversations. They want to engage with you. They want to learn about you. And they want to know that you've done some work to learn about them ahead of time as well. So these are all things that can be helpful at making those conversations feel productive and engaging. It's unlikely that if you upload a resume to the resume book that the employers will have that on a desk and be able to pick you out of that, right? How they work with the resume book is sort of outside of the career fair. They might reach out to you beyond the career fair. They might reach out to you before the career fair and say, would you like to come and chat with us at the table? So don't assume, obviously, that they have any information that you're not giving them then and there when you're having those conversations with them. You'll also notice that some of the firms may have actual, not only jobs posted or internships posted, but interview schedules posted as well. So Locust Walk, it's a sort of consulting firm, investment bank type firm. They have interview schedules that are connected to the thing that they want to talk about at the career fair. You can actually apply for those up front. And I think they're doing in-person interviews for those roles on the day of the career fair as well. So the deadline for this opportunity sort of ends before the career fair, but they're there to sort of engage with you as well. So you sort of want to just keep an eye out for how the employers are doing what they do and the nuances of how they want to engage with students and postdocs at Penn. Some best practices. In this day and age, we are very much mask optional. If you're more comfortable in a mask environment, because there may be lots of people in the room, then please do that. Most of the employers that I saw at the Career Link Fair, the one that we did last week, were not wearing masks, but that doesn't mean that you have to not wear a mask. It means that it's up to you. Smiling is harder in a mask, because obviously you have to sort of bring a little bit more energy if you are wearing a mask to introduce yourself and make sure people can hear you. The rooms can be loud, especially when they're busy career fairs. These are smaller, the BioSciences ones are smaller fairs, so I don't think that's going to be so much of a problem, but make sure you bring that energy and that enthusiasm so that people can see the verbal smile that you're giving. Shaking hands used to be a good thing that we would recommend people to do. Obviously, that's optional too. So some employers don't want to shake your hand. Sometimes you don't want to shake employer's hand. So I think you can just skip that formality. Obviously, if they reach out to you with their hand, you can just say, I'm not shaking hands right now. Hope you understand, right? And they'll be like, sure, fine. So just be ready for that. But if you want to shake hands, I think that's okay. You just have to read the room as well. If they're not shaking hands with you, then move on from that experience. Your 30-second intro is what we were talking about in terms of your narrative, right? How you want to present yourself to the people in your room. You're going to have a name badge that you get when you register for the fair. It's going to be a sticky label on you, so they'll sort of be able to see your name, but you want to give them your name. You want to give a bit of background, your degree level, what you're focusing on. You want to then talk about perhaps an experience that is relevant. I'm a member of the consulting club at Penn, so I'm particularly interested in consulting firms. Then you want to sort of move to what you know about them. I saw that you have this job. I saw in the news that one of my former lab mates works at your organization, so I know this. That's sort of your connection with them. And then you sort of want to move on to the question. That's the information that you're going to get from this interaction, right? And the question obviously shouldn't be, what do you do, right? Because we hear from employers that that's one of the biggest no-nos in a career fair. They really want people to know what they do ahead of time. And there's plenty of time for you to do that. That's when you ask a sort of an informed question that gets the conversation started. And then you ask the question, they start talking. Then the rest of the conversation is a very organic process, right? You get to follow up on that question, you get to share more information, and you get to have that conversation. Now, that conversation can last as long as the people behind you sort of want it to last. So in other words, if there's a long line of people, you might have to move through that conversation. If there's no one behind you, you can continue to have that conversation. I guarantee that employers would more rather have a conversation with someone than sit there at their table and not have a conversation, right? So again, reading the room so that you know how to sort of manage that experience is going to be helpful. In terms of closing out the conversation, you sort of have to come up with sort of next steps in terms of what you want to happen, right? So if you're just gathering information, you might say, I'm early on in my program. I'd just love to find out more about your organization so that when I apply in the future, I have a better sense. At the end of that conversation, you might say, this has been so helpful. Thank you so much. You might still follow up with that person if you took their name down with a thank you email that just says, I really enjoyed chatting with you at the career fair. Thanks for sharing that information. I'm going to look into some of the resources that you shared. If there's a job or an internship that you're interested in, then you might have to be a little bit more focused with your follow-up. You might say, what is the best way for me to apply for this role? Should I apply through Handshake? Can I send you an email directly? Let me know what the next steps are. And they will give you insight into what that looks like. If you are giving someone a paper copy of your resume, as I said, you're not really applying because no one really wants to take that and scan it somewhere. In many cases, they may hold on to it and they may keep that for their reference, but you still may have to apply for a formal position anyway. So you need to ask how to do that. And in fact, in many cases, what you learn from your discussions, you want to take and update your resume with that information so that when you do submit your resume for that role, it's a better version because you're integrating information that you took from those conversations, right? So that's the whole purpose of some of these career fair interactions, is to give you more knowledge about what they value so that you can change your resume to better fit the role that you're applying to, right? Using that knowledge to update your resume in that way is a really great way to do that. So you might just say to them, there's a couple of things I want to change on my resume. I'm going to make some changes. Can I send this to you directly, after the career fair? So these are things worth doing. I think the thank you email is really nice. Employers like to be, thanked for spending their time there. But it's just a very brief, thank you for chatting with me at the career fair. I attached my resume just so you remember who I am. I really enjoyed it, right? And attaching a resume just to let them know who you are is a subtle way of giving them an electronic version of your resume, right? If you're comfortable doing that. So those are some best practices that I think you can sort of bear in mind to wrap up the conversations for these in-person events. And then go wash your hands, right? Everyone should wash hands. In terms of the virtual career fairs, right, there are sort of subtle differences there that to be thinking of. First of all, there are some great perks, right? There's no queuing up in a virtual fair. You have pre-scheduled times, 10-minute slots that you can sign up for. So you know when you're having a conversation, you know who you're going to be having a conversation with. That's very, very beneficial to make you feel in control of the situation. You can also sign up for 30-minute info sessions, right? These are longer general informations that usually have a Q&A at the end, so that can be helpful as well. Because you are in your space, on your screen, chatting with someone on another screen, there's no other distractions other than ones in your house that you're used to anyway, cats and dogs and children and so forth. So it's very introvert-friendly in that you can really focus your attention on the conversation. It's extrovert-friendly too, right? Not to exclude our extroverts in the room. And then you don't have to manage anything like walking around or being hot or being sweaty or having bags or anything like that. So there's lots of benefits to the virtual thing. Each fair has its own benefits. There's no bad or good fair. They're all things that you can take advantage of in these different settings. For the virtual one, as I said, registration isn't open yet. You have to wait until that opens because we're waiting for the employers to set up their one-on-one schedules. They set up when they can meet with people at the fair, and then when the registration opens, you'll see all those scheduled ahead of time so that you can pick and choose through those. That's why you don't register for this one until a week before. Beforehand, there's lots of things that you can be doing on Handshake just to make sure that you are up to date on making sure your profile is ready. And when employers do engage with you, on Handshake, they will be able to pull your profile. So making sure that it's updated is going to be helpful. So there's a couple of things that you can do. When you're logged on to Handshake, click on your name or face in the top right-hand corner, and then you'll see My Profile and Settings. There's two of the options here. If we go to My Profile, things that you can be doing, adding a photo, right? Making sure that people can visually recognize you, updating your graduation date, your school year, your major, your GPA. Again, because this fair is open to undergrads all the way up to postdocs and alumni, some of this may look different from you. Postdocs don't really have majors, for example, but fill out as much as you can in terms of just keeping it updated and keeping it relevant to your the audiences that you're going to be speaking with in terms of those employers. The GPA is an interesting one because many graduate students or postdocs don't have a GPA necessarily, but not having a GPA can sometimes be a challenge on Handshake because if you're applying for a specific job, the employers may have set a GPA sort of limit. They want people above this in many cases. We try to advocate for that not to be one of the things that they do, but employers can do that. So if you are, let's say, a postdoc and you don't have a current GPA, just put in your last GPA from your last academic program, and that just means that you just won't be cut out for any of those opportunities that might be there. You can also update your sort of interest, your career interests, the things that you're interested in, where you want to work or what industry you want to work with and the role that you want to have. That's going to give employers some insight into you if they pull up your profile ahead of time, even if just a couple of minutes before they're meeting with you. So, it doesn't take a long to do this, but it's worth making sure that you look ready and look aligned with the jobs that you're applying to as you're engaging with employers. You can add your gender pronouns. You can add, make sure that your school year is up to date. If you've been an undergrad, now you're a master's student, you can just make sure that all these things are tidied up and ready to go. One of the most important things on Handshake when you're engaging in the virtual fair is to be as available as possible to the employers to see your information, right? So you want to change your privacy. This is under the settings tab. And you want to change it to community, which means that other students can see you, but employers can see you. And that's going to be helpful because that way they can see your profile, they can see your summary, they can see the information about you. If you've uploaded a resume, they can also see that as well. So do make sure that you've changed this so that you can be as open as possible. If you'd like to change it back after the career fair, certainly you can. But I think it's a good best practice to be as available to the people who have the jobs as possible. You can also upload your resume, right? And this is important. This is like bringing your resume to you with in the in-person one. If you upload it and make that resume public, the employers can then pull that from you and integrate that into their own sort of database of resumes, which is helpful because it just increases the likelihood that something will happen. It may not be a targeted sort of application, but it's great for you to sort of maximize the likelihood that employers want to engage with you. When registration does open, so this is a week before the actual career fair, that's when you can go in and sign up for events. So what will happen is once you go back to the career fair page, you'll see a list of organizations and you'll see that they have one-on-one sessions and or group sessions. Sometimes they only have group sessions. Sometimes they only have one-on-one sessions. Sometimes they have both. So if you click on one of the one-to-one sessions, one of the arrows here, you'll see that there's a bunch of times that you can then pick to schedule those one-on-one sessions. Each one-on-one session is a 10-minute interaction. They are not interviews, right? You are not interviewing for a job. They are more informational interviews. You're asking for information about the jobs or internships or the organization, right? It's still just a casual interaction. It's not a job interview itself because 10 minutes is too short, obviously, to do that. But really helpful, really, focused interaction with this employer. They're not waiting in line. You're not waiting in line. They're not seeing a line of people waiting to chat with them. So it's a great opportunity. So you'll pick your sessions. You can then go back and pick on the group sessions that you want to have, the 30-minute group sessions. If I just go back a couple of times. So on this slide, you'll see that these times on the second line here, the 2 and the 2:10 one have red dots against it. That means that there's a conflict. You already have a time slot scheduled with another employer at that time. So certainly you can go back and change that if you wanted to meet with a different employer. And you have some flexibility to change those one-on-ones up until about, I think, 24 or 48 hours before the fair. You don't want to cancel abruptly because when the employers are creating their schedules to engage with you, they're expecting you to be there. but certainly there's some flexibility to arrange your schedule in that week before the career fair starts. Some best practices that I think is worth thinking about. Don't for sure schedule 30 one-on-one appointments in a row, because you won't be able to keep on schedule with that one. Things will take too long to switch over to different rooms. The group sessions that employers have can be really helpful because they are sort of general information where you don't have to have done a lot of background research into the organization, because they're going to share some of that information. If you schedule one of the 30-minute sessions before a one-on-one, obviously you can take the information that you learn from the 30-minute session and ask questions about that in a one-on-one, and that shows that you're being proactive as well. For some of the most popular employers, those one-on-one sessions will get snapped up quickly, and then employers will oftentimes add more. So if you don't see it on the first day that registration opens that there's no availability, keep checking back, because employers will update their schedules to accommodate the number of people who are connecting with them. And then obviously, as with any virtual setting, you want to make sure your space is appropriate. You want to be semi-professional, which could mean casually professional or just professional from the waist up in terms of these one-on-one interactions over video. But you're all skilled at that now, so I don't think you need any information on that one. You can access the one-on-ones a few minutes beforehand, even if the employer's not there. You sit around and wait for them to join. Same deal in terms of interacting with the employer. You want to greet them, you want to be enthusiastic, you want to give your introduction, you want to bring a lot of energy to that, especially towards the end of a career fair. If you've had lots of conversations as a recruiter, you want everyone to be energizing, because it can be tiring from their perspective, tiring from your perspective as well. So bringing the energy makes you both feel good about that. 10 minutes is a sort of a fixed period of time, so you need to sort of make sure that those last couple of minutes are switching to the wrap up. As we talked about with the in-person, what are the next steps if you're applying, or if you want to follow up and ask more questions because you didn't get to some of the questions, you can ask, is it okay if I follow up with you? Can you share some contact information with me? They may not be willing to do that. They may point you to someone else, but that last couple of minutes is really about wrapping up. You don't want to wait until there's like 20 seconds and then be like, and then, you don't really have a solid wrap up there. So keep an eye on the time, keep a timer nearby or a clock nearby, and make sure that you wrap up in a professional and confident and controlled manner. You can do a network test for the Handshake platform to make sure your video is working. Again, that link is in the chat. I'm going to repost the links in the chat because I haven't done so for a bit. So this Twilio link here, you can find that in the list of resources that I just shared in the chat. And that's just a good thing to practice ahead of time to make sure that all your systems are fine. In previous years, when they were perfecting their Handshake platform, sometimes Safari didn't work or wasn't the preferred one. Chrome was always seen a good one. So if you run into any issues, probably the first thing to test is, does it work on a different browser? That seems to be the, unplug, plug back in approach to virtual issues. But Handshake does have a help button on the app or on the websites or on the platform. So if you run into issues during the session, you can oftentimes hit that. And we'll have a Zoom room open as well. So if you're running into challenges with connecting with employers during the virtual session, you'll see that there'll be a Zoom link at the top of the career fair page when you log onto Handshake, and we'll be on there providing feedback or providing help where we can. These are also in the list of resources that I've just shared. These are just how to make the most of virtual fairs. These are Handshake documents, so I won't go into any more detail of these here, but you can access these and make sure that you are getting input from Handshake about how to manage the Handshake virtual career fair platform. Some final things just to remember, just to summarize, make sure that you keep an eye on that registration date for the virtual fair, the 22nd, and then once that's there, you go in and schedule some one-on-one appointments. Make sure your profile is updated to reflect where you are right now and what you want to be known for, or what you want the employer to know about you. So there is a summary section, a get to know me section in Handshake. You want to write that, you can pull from your LinkedIn profile if you have one of those, and just cut and paste it into your Handshake one. You want to make sure your resume is available if you are actively on the job search, and you want to make sure you've done your research into the employers ahead of time. That really is the key foundation to having a successful fair, is to tell the employers, this is what I know, and this are the questions that I have, right? They really appreciate that. So in general terms, then, how is a career fair helpful? I've sort of run through the nuts and bolts of it, because you really don't have to be looking for a job to attend a career fair or to benefit from a career fair. It is a wonderful exploration opportunity. It's a wonderful networking opportunity. And for a couple of reasons. One is the employers are sort of paying money to come to campus to do these things. So they really want to have engaging conversations, right? So they would rather, as I said, have any conversations with people who are interested in them than sit there and do nothing. And if the more interesting conversations that they have right now in present time, the more they're likely to come back in future years when you might be interested in actually applying for roles. So even if you're early on in your program, consider this as an opportunity to network. The other benefit of these fairs is that these employers are basically stuck behind their real table or their virtual table for 4 hours. They can't run away. They're not hidden. It's very easy to establish connection with them. Unlike in the world of networking, if you're trying to find one person to reach out to, their schedule may be busy, they may not respond, right? All of that is sort of negated in the career fair because they're right there and they can't run away. Not that they run away, but they're there for you. And so take advantage of that to ask questions and get some insight. And so some of the questions that you can ask are about, learning about the types of roles that they have, learning about the types of skills that they're looking for in ideal candidates, learning about their application or interviewing process. If you do apply, what's that going to look like? Learning about their timelines. When do these jobs get posted? When should I be looking for these things? And so whatever the question is about the jobs that they may have or the company or their hiring process, there are great ways to sort of get that information by having these conversations. And if you do see alumni, with the alumni tag on their name badge, you can ask them a little bit about their experience getting to their role, right? They're representing their employers, but they can also represent themselves as individual candidates and how they got there, just a little bit, especially if there's time, there's not a big queue behind you. So that's the type of good question that you want to learn from them as well. So even in your first year, you could, if you're a first year PhD and you've got another 5 years, you can learn something from this. You don't have to actively do much after the fact other than to say to yourself, well, if I want to go into medical writing, they really need people to have a broad experience in writing. And then over the next 5 years, you can look for those opportunities so that when you are ready, you can leverage those experiences that you've gained because you heard from a recruiter that those are important. So lots of things to sort of think about in terms of exploring careers, exploring different industries, but also networking with people in a very sort of structured environment. It's not just a sort of a meet and greet. There are employers, you know who they are, you know the types of positions that they have, and you can ask targeted questions. Having gone to a career fair, as I mentioned, the things that you can be doing with that information is saying to yourself, well, I kept hearing that they want these skills, but I don't have that yet. What can I do on campus to gain those skills, right? It's very easy to look for opportunities through student groups or other experiences on campus to gain new skills that you can leverage. What you hear from employers about the skills that they're looking for, you can then take back to your resume and say, have I talked about those skills? Have I mentioned those skills? Could I highlight them better so that they stand out more clearly? That's going to be a way to make sure that your next application is more impactful. If you take down the name of the person that you're meeting with, and then Handshake, it's easy because it's printed out and you know who that is ahead of time. In person, you might have to be a little bit more thoughtful about remembering that name. You can name drop that person when you apply for a position, right? The last paragraph of a cover letter should be why this job, why this organization. And you can say, having talked with so-and-so at the recent Penn BioSciences career fair, it was great to hear about your mentoring program for, interns. And that makes me even more excited to apply for this role, right? And it decreases the gap between you and that employer. It makes you feel more familiar. You are mentioning people who work there. You're mentioning the information that you gain from an interaction. That's all going to be very beneficial. You can think about whether any of the people there who may be alumni could be people that you could follow up afterwards and learn more about their own experience, right? So not them representing their company, but them representing, whatever they were, an undergrad, a master's student, a PhD, a postdoc. I'd love to hear more about that. Those are informational interviews, not really great to do in a career fair, but great to do after. But you might find a person who's willing to do that by going to a career fair. And then, of course, if you find out that you still have questions about employers or about their roles, these become new questions that you can ask in your future networking, right? So now you're saying, I didn't get an answer to this, but this is a question that I can find if I do some outreach to different types of people who have that insight and who can share that insight with me. So all of these things can help you through the next few years if you're early on in your program at Penn. As I mentioned, informational interviews are a different type of networking, right? These are one-on-one discussions outside of a recruiting event like a career fair where you're learning about people's experience and how they got to where they are and what skills they did and what they did to get their roles. Some of the questions that you can ask in these informational interviews are really about their skills. What skills do you use in your current role? What are some of the challenges that you face in your current role? Because you can leverage that information as you're putting together your own resume. You can leverage that information as you're creating stories for your next job interview. These aren't really the types of questions that you're going to ask in a career fair in most cases, right? Sometimes the conversations will stray into this, but in most cases, these are more of those one-to-one interactions outside of a recruiting event. These are some of the examples of questions that I sort of just came up with that you could ask at career fairs. And I've given examples of these in some of the narratives that I've given thus far already. But it's just you gathering information that can be helpful. I saw on your website that this. Can you tell me more about that? I see that you're looking for this skill. What does that mean? How can I illustrate that I have that? I do have that skill, but how can I illustrate that I have it in a resume that would make it jump out for you? What is the timing of your internships? I'm a postdoc, I'm a graduate student. What types of roles would your organization have that value that advanced degree? Or I come from this major, what types of roles would be a good fit for that, right? So you can ask about your own academic background and see how that fits. And then you can also ask, what else do you do at Penn to engage with students? Do you have other types of recruiting interactions? And they might talk about info sessions, they might talk about tech talks that they're doing, they might talk about lots of things. Or they might just say, nothing yet, but that sounds like a great idea, and we should come back and do more stuff. So again, lots of things that you might be able to ask about. If you are a member of a student group and you want to ask if employers are interested in engaging in the student group, I think that's perfectly acceptable to do. They may not be interested at that moment in time, but it's a way of forming a relationship with them that might be helpful to you. Oftentimes you're there representing yourself, not your student group, but I feel like sometimes you can take advantage of that as well. Going back to this idea of, these conversations can be the most impactful ways of changing your narratives when it comes to applying for a role. By listening to people describe what they do in their role, by listening to recruiters describe what they look for, you can take that language and you can integrate it into your own narrative, into your own resumes, into your own interview answers. That can be so helpful to sort of make sure that you're really aligning the value that you bring with the employers, right? By just being an active listener in that process. So that's really the benefit, right? You can take some of this information in many cases, especially if you're on the internship or job search, and you can integrate it into your resume and make that more effective. Which leads us nicely, I think, into our resume best practices. I just want to give you a few things to be thinking of when it comes to resumes. First of all, just a quick overview what a resume is. Probably all know what a resume is, but it is a document that focuses on relevant skills, and relevant skills are only relevant to your audience, right? So you have to think about what are skills that are relevant to the different audiences that I might be engaging. Working in biotech and pharma or consulting or science writing, there are shared skills and there are more specific skills. So you have to understand what those skills are. You want to be able to adapt it in most cases. You want different versions for each job, but in a career fair, you might have a more general version because again, you are the resume, you are the customized version that you can, your narrative is customized to your audience at that point in time, even if your resume is fairly fixed. We do have resume books, as I said, for the BioSciences career fair. So these are open right now. Again, I'll put in the link just in case people came in and didn't see it the first time, but the link to these is in the chat right now. You can upload these once you've tweaked it if you want to tweak it, and then we'll be sending this after the deadline to all of the employers. So this is why I want to give you some quick resume tips today, just to make sure that you have some best practices to apply. One of the things to think about with a resume is what do you want the reader to walk away with having read it, right? So if you are submitting a resume and someone's picking it up, you're not there necessarily to fill in the gaps outside of the career fair, right? They downloaded it from the resume book. What do you want them to walk away with having read it? And sometimes when I ask this question in advising appointments, people don't really know for sure. And that can be tricky because if you don't know what the takeaways are, then it's going to be very hard for the employer to know what those takeaways are either. Like you've lived in your own skin for a long time. They are just meeting you for the first time on a piece of paper. So you want to make sure that you have a clear idea about what that is. And the answer I often get from students is, well, I want them to know that I have a lot of experience and I have a good educational background, but those aren't really tangibles in the same way as skills, right? So you need to sort of break that down. Your key skills should be aligned with the skills sought out by the role that you're applying to. So if it is consulting, problem solving, teamwork, managing a project, collaboration, right? If it's biotech, keeping up to date with new technologies and being able to apply those, managing a project, communicating to different audiences, right? So some of the themes that you are going to be strong in are going to be things that resonate with the employers. And you want to make sure that those come to the top. Summary statements at the beginning of a resume can be sometimes very helpful because they are basically the conclusions of that resume stated up front, right? These are the things that you want people to walk away with right from the get-go, and then they'll see evidence of that in the rest of the rest of the resume. These are just examples of some summary statements or summary themes. This isn't one person. This is different themes from different resumes, as it were. But you can see that these are broader concepts, right? These aren't specific experiences from a specific job or a specific academic role. These are broad themes that are the conclusions of the resume. In order for these to work, you have to have in the rest of the document examples, specific examples of what these look like, right? So that's going to be a key part of that. But you can see that these give the reader a very quick sense of what it is that you might bring to a role, so that these summary qualifications can be actually very helpful. You also want to prioritize the skills and the keywords and the concepts in your resume so that the most important things jump off the page to your audience. The most relevant things jump off the page to your audience. So what does that look like? So here's an education section, a master's student in environmental studies, perfectly good sections, thesis and coursework, totally recommend those. But if the job that the person was applying to, or the job that they were interested in was a sustainability analyst, I see that, who's looking for GIS skills, I see sustainability as a course and I see GIS as a course, but they're not the first things mentioned, right? So to make it more engaging, you might just change up the order of these courses so that the most relevant ones jump off the page first. It's a very simple thing to do, but it makes it easier for the reader to see the value that you're bringing. Here's another example, skill section, right? So perfectly good skill section, programming languages, software, so forth. But if the role specifically mentions that you're interested in C++ or SolidWorks, yes, they're there. But if you move them to the forefront, they're going to jump off much more easily. Now, again, with skills, if you're listing them in the skill section, that's great. For the ones that the employer is most excited by, you also want to show them in action in the experience section. Use C++ to do X, use SolidWorks to do Y, right? Show them in action in the experience, list them in the skills. Under the relevant experience, right? You don't have to read all this, but let's say this was, the experience that someone brought, but they were applying for a data-focused role in the tech industry. So they come from a more research-focused role, but they want to move into tech. There is, quantitative skills here and experiences here, but right now they are prioritized at the end of the list of bullet points. But you could potentially, change up the order so that those jump to the top. So the most relevant ones, even if they were the smallest part of the experience, are the ones that the employers see first, because that's going to keep them interested in your experience. Now, you have to rearrange some of the context of this, because sometimes just jumping into organizing data when no one knows what data that represents, isn't going to be clear. But the idea is shift around some of the terminology so that it's easy to see those experiences. In terms of bullet points, as part of the experience, skill, context, outcome is basically the way that you want to set these up. Here's the skill that I used that's relevant to you, the reader. Here's the context in which I used it. Here's the outcome that I gained from that, right? And so not everything will have an outcome. It's not about curing cancer or about having a publication. Sometimes the outcome can be a novel protocol or a new relationship or a new collaboration. The skill obviously wants to be the one that you're really focusing on to make sure that it is relevant to the roles that you're interested in or the industries that you're interested in. Sometimes when I'm doing resume reviews, people share their experiences in very general ways. And the question that I ask, or the question I ask myself is, can I picture what these are? When someone says, engaged in outreach with local organizations and community, can I really see what that looks like? Can I see what skills were used to make that happen? I can imagine things, right? I can imagine from my own experience what that might look like, but it doesn't really tell me. Assisted with project logistics and analysis, right? Were you using software? Were you using a platform? Was it successful? Was there data involved, right? Anytime that you have a sort of a 6 or 7 word bullet point, it's probably not telling enough of a story for the reader to really picture what you're doing. The clearer the picture that you're creating in the mind of the reader, the easier it is for them to imagine you in the roles that you may be applying to, right? So making sure that there's enough story centered around the skills, not necessarily around the context, but around the skills to make it easily illustrative, or to make it really illustrative in the mind of the reader. So, you see in job descriptions all the time, strong communication skills and be able to work with a diverse team. So you can't just write in the resume, effective communication and collaboration skills, right? Because it doesn't really mean anything. So you might want to go into a more specific version. And these are just, examples of taking a broad concept and trying to make it meaningful without going into too much detail into, what that context was. Because many times the things that you've done obviously aren't going to be the things that you're doing in the next role that you're applying to. But the skills that you use when doing those things, those are immensely transferable. And so making sure that you really center the bullet point around the skills and how you use those is going to be your priority here. So just examples of what these can look like in terms of making those clear illustrations. Formatting is not critical. It's not going to get you the job, but it might lose you the opportunity to interview because, people say that this is not good attention to detail, this is messy. Sometimes when you're creating a resume, you really want to cram everything in there because you want a nice one-page version. One page just works well for a career fair, especially because that's all they're going to look at. They're not going to go through 5 pages of your stuff necessarily. Doesn't have to be 1 page. If you have you're in a graduate program or a postdoc, probably you're going to need more pages, depending on the industry that you're applying to. But taking away all the space, sort of makes it feel like walking through a swamp-filled jungle as opposed to a nice tree-lined alley with a summer breeze blowing to cool you down, right? Spacing works at a psychological level to help people process the information. So just play around with the way that you're doing the resume to make sure that there's enough space so that people can really appreciate what it is that you are saying and can process what you're saying, as opposed to having it be an information dump, which is hard for them to do. In terms of formatting and how you want to use it, certainly it's up to you. Sometimes I think what you want to do is not use a template that you saw, but just think about how to prioritize information that you really want to jump off. So this is a kind of standard resume template that I see people use. Institution comes first, right? So University of Pennsylvania, perfectly good reputation, obviously. The degree is sort of second line, and it's put in italics, which makes it much harder to read. Things that are bolded are University of Pennsylvania and the location, Philadelphia, which is not that important in the grand scheme of things. This is how I might change that, right? I put the degree first, because that's really what you're marketing. The institution is bolded too. The location, the date need to be there, but they're not critical, so they don't get bolded, right? So hopefully it jumps off more clearly what I am and where I am, and other stuff is given less of a priority. Again, formatting is up to you. I just want to give you the idea that there's ways to sort of prioritize it differently. And I guarantee now, if you go to your resume and look at your dates, for the majority of you, you're going to have inconsistent date hyphens, big, small spaces, no spaces. Does anyone care? No, but now that I've told you, you'll care. And if the job requires attention to detail and you can't get it right in a one-page version, then you run the risk of someone saying, well, what are you going to do with this multi-million-dollar initiative that you're going to be working on? So an easy fix. My next best practice sort of repeats what I've said before. Get away from your resume and network, because what you learn from those conversations, you can apply in very targeted ways to make your resume better. If you just look at your resume in a vacuum, you're going to find that you don't have a lot of ability to change the narrative. You want to change the narrative by integrating other people's narratives or other people's language into how you describe your own experiences. And then certainly schedule an appointment at Career Services to get feedback, or use your own peers to get feedback and give them feedback on theirs. It's much easier to give people critical feedback on their materials than it is on yours. But by giving other people feedback, you're going to find it easier to give yourself feedback as well. So your skills, your keywords, they're going to be important in terms of your resume. Formatting important so that it's easy to see the content, right? That's why the format is important. It doesn't get in the way. It doesn't stand out. It just makes it easy to see the content. The last bit is you plus, really. And what is you plus? You plus is your narrative, right? What you say about yourself, the energy that you bring to an interaction, the fact that you've been proactive and done some of the background work, the fact that you ask interesting and interested questions, and the fact that you are always proactive with follow-up, right? That's the added energy that you just can't get from a resume. In a resume, you can't create a bullet point that says, excitedly collaborated with, right? It's not an energizing document, but you have a lot of energy. And so your networking and your engagement with employers in a one-on-one setting or in a small group setting can be fantastic to make sure that you're bringing that to the equation. Resources. So you can certainly scan this. It should take you to the same place that I'm sending you right now in the chat in terms of that list of documents, list of resources rather. A whole bunch of resume resources that I put in there for you to take a look at. Some are specific to graduate students, some are general to everyone. They're all going to be relevant. They're all going to be subtly different in terms of the advice that they give you, because that's the world that we live in with resumes. Content is key. In other words, making sure you're really centering your materials around your relevant skills. That's the thing that you're going to want to do as part of your resume. But the tools that I'm sharing with you can be a fantastic way of getting different input into how to put together resumes. Every hiring manager is different. They value different things in a resume. They're not all using the same template themselves. They may be judging your resume on their own terrible resume, for all I know. So it's okay that there's going to be differences, but the resources should be helpful as part of that process.